Right, so the BBC has been caught with its trousers down over the matter of Israel yet again, and in the most karmic way possible, as a story they put out rapidly came undone, let's say, and their correction of their blatant lie, as it seems to be, didn't go unnoticed either, still providing cover for Israel and Israeli figures, and colluding, it would appear, with the British government at the same time in doing so, rather than holding them to account, refusing to hold power to account. The supposed impartial, publicly funded national broadcaster that is becoming more and more distrusted, seemingly with every passing day. It is becoming increasingly inexcusable and increasingly more difficult to hide from the general public, and yet they just keep doing it. This story centres around the very secretive visit to the UK by Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, a man who has justified the ongoing aid blockade of Gaza by saying the aid isn't humanitarian when it goes to Hamas, and yet despite demanding Israel let the aid in, this Labour government of Keir Starmer, of David Lammy, still welcomed this guy into the country under the cover of secrecy. But the news still got out, and that was thanks to alternative and independent media, as the mainstream colluded in the BBC's silence. Where an attempt to raise an arrest warrant was tried, Lammy, it turns out, offered Saar immunity. Never, it seems, an Israeli genocidaire that he's not happy to cover for and shake hands with. It's bad enough that we have a pro-Israel government unforgivably supporting Israeli atrocity, but when the main media collude in that as well, turning to alternative news outlets has never been more important for people in this country to keep informed, because you can't guarantee you're going to be told what you need to know on TV or in the papers, on Israel, or frankly anything else. Right, so the BBC has once again demonstrated its willingness to provide cover for Israel's crimes, this time by obscuring the secret visit of Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar to the UK. You see, Saar arrived in London for undisclosed meetings with UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and also met Board of Deputies of British Jews Chair Phil Rosenberg. His visit coincided with Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza, as we know, still ongoing, where thousands of Palestinian civilians, including women and children, have been massacred in relentless airstrikes and blockades, some of which continued to go on at the very same time Saar was here in the UK. But rather than scrutinising this visit, or the UK government's role in shielding a representative of a regime accused of genocide, the BBC chose distortion and complicity. Gideon Saar's visit to the UK was not meant to be public knowledge. Had it not been leaked ahead of time, Middle East Eye having punched out an exclusive on the matter, that's where I first became aware of it, it quite possibly would have remained entirely concealed from the British public. Saar is a senior member of an Israeli government that stands accused of genocide at the International Court of Justice. He has openly defended Israel's blockade of humanitarian aid to Gaza, claiming that such aid fuels Hamas rather than alleviating starvation. His presence in London should therefore have been a major news story. Yet the BBC, along with much of the mainstream press, remained utterly silent on this. But the BBC, they went a step further than that. You see, whilst here in the UK, Saar met with some of Israel's biggest supporters here, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, some of which have spoken out against Israel in recent days, which marks quite a shift. I did cover this in a video the other day, but the vast majority of the board are still avowedly supporting Israel in spite of everything they're doing, in spite of the genocide they are very much meting out. Yet the BBC's coverage of this meeting, they alleged had happened in Israel. The arrival of Saar in the UK had been leaked, so how could Saar possibly be in two places at once? Oh dear, BBC. Oh dear, oh dear. When challenged, the BBC quietly edited its article to remove their false claim that Saar had met Rosenberg in Israel rather than London. This was not a minor error. This is such an obvious attempt to provide diplomatic cover via the media. This is not even a mistake a rookie journalist would make. This had to have been intentional. You don't mistake Israel for London. A deliberate obfuscation on the part of the BBC, as this would appear, designed to downplay Saar's presence in the UK and avoid scrutiny over why such a high-profile Israeli official was being hosted here in secret. The BBC's initial framing suggested the meeting occurred abroad, reinforcing the illusion that Saar was not on British soil. The correction came only after it had been widely covered by alternative media, forcing the BBC to acknowledge what it had done was a falsehood, but the damage was done. The BBC had already shown its hand. Even more alarming than the media's silence was the role of David Lammy in facilitating Saar's visit, though. Saar was meant to visit last month, but things got too hot for Israel at that time. So instead of an official visit, Saar was essentially smuggled into the country to visit this month. Lammy met with Saar behind closed doors, but with news of his arrival having already been leaked, an attempt to obtain an arrest warrant for Saar was made. Yet Lamy offered Saar assurances that he would not face arrest for complicity in war crimes, that he had immunity whilst he was here, and the arrest warrant ended up being refused. The legal basis for arresting Saar came from the Hind Rajab Foundation and the Global Legal Action Network, GLAN, who had sought an arrest warrant for Saar under universal jurisdiction laws, given his role in Israel's blockade of Gaza. Yet Lamy's intervention ensured Saar's immunity, allowing him to remain in the UK without consequence. Lamy personally assured Saar that the UK government would block any attempt to detain him, effectively granting diplomatic impunity to a man whose policies had contributed to the starvation of Palestinians. So this is not just a failure to uphold international law, putting UK-Israeli diplomatic relations ahead of international law, despite the crimes Israel is accused of. It is also an absolute moral abdication by this government. While Israel bombed civilian tents in Gaza, Lamy was offering protection to one of its architects at the very same time, and then he made a tweet. Of course he did, which just added hypocrisy to his immorality, because on Good Friday, he tweeted out that, "This Good Friday, let us remember all those suffering around the world. At this challenging time, compassion and forgiveness, as shown by Jesus on the cross, are more important than ever. There are not words that can adequately express my contempt for this man anymore. This just isn't a word in the English language big enough, strong enough to suffice." So let's just move on and try not to think about it too much. Moving on, let's come to the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the BOD, who also had a part to play in this sorry state of affairs, a group which presents itself as a representative body for British Jewry, but are actually nothing of the sort. They are absolutely massive supporters of Israel, though, no matter what they do, it seems. By hosting Saar, Phil Rosenberg and the BOD sent a clear message that it stands with Israel, no matter how many war crimes it commits. Phil Rosenberg's meeting with Saar was not an act of dialogue, but of an endorsement, a signal that the BOD prioritises Zionist politics over human rights, and all following my recent story of 10% of the BOD itself now coming out against Israeli atrocity, but only 10% of them, and that it's taken this long for even that many to speak out. The BOD's willingness to engage with him without a word of condemnation for Israel's actions, big smiles, handshakes, reveals its true priorities. Not justice, not peace, but unwavering support for apartheid and ethnic cleansing. I can't see how anyone would want to be represented by that, and it's little wonder a significant chunk of British Jewry are included in that thinking. For months, the BBC has faced criticism for its skewed coverage of Gaza, downplaying Israeli atrocities while amplifying its justifications. Hamas-run health ministries, Iran-backed Houthis, the word genocide banned from use, and parroting Israeli military claims as gospel truth without scrutiny. The BBC has repeatedly failed to meet its own standards of impartiality, and more people have been waking up to this. But this latest episode, where the BBC initially misreported Saar's location to obscure his UK visit, might be their most blatant and most erroneous yet. But it is just another example of the apparent institutional bias the broadcaster shows. By erasing Saar's presence in London, the BBC helped the government avoid accountability. When the truth emerged, the broadcaster quietly corrected its error, hoping no one would notice, but the public did notice. And the BBC's credibility has suffered yet another blow, and deservedly so. Then a total media blackout surrounding Saar's visit raises serious questions about press freedom in the UK as well. Major outlets ignored the story. Were they leaned on to do so, possibly? It wasn't just the BBC. The Murdoch scum gave it a pass, as did the Murdoch Times, as did the Daily Mail, as did the Tory Graph, and on, despite its obvious newsworthiness and relevance to the British public. Was this self-censorship, or were they leaned on? Was this fear of backlash from pro-Israel lobby groups? Was this indifference to Palestinian suffering? Is that all it was? Or was it government collusion with the mainstream media? The BBC's failure, Lamy's complicity, and the Board of Deputies' moral bankruptcy aren't anything new, or even news to a lot of people now, but still, it must not go unchallenged. The UK public deserves to know why their government is shielding war criminals while Gaza burns. They deserve a media that tells the truth, not one that apparently obscures it and goes to great lengths to distort it, apparently. Once again, I have to say, support your favourite independent and alternative outlets, because they aren't billionaire-backed. Their impartiality and integrity and commitment to telling the truth, to real journalism, is what keeps them going. They can't survive without that. Because if they distorted the truth, like the BBC has apparently just done, it would be the end of them, with their reputations being all important, collapsing readily without them as they would. It is, in my view, inarguable the smaller independent news outlets inherently must be more honest in order to survive. And if you're not already embracing the array of independent news outlets on offer, this scandal should be a bit of a wake-up call. If the BBC cannot report honestly on Israel's crimes, what else does it not report honestly on? How can you trust it or any other of these apparent collusory news outlets on anything? And if Lammy cannot stand up for human rights, he has no right to call himself progressive or even representative of British people and British values. And if the Board of Deputies cannot condemn genocide, it has no right to claim any form of moral leadership for British Jewry or anyone else. For more on the story of the splits happening in the BOD, though, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so you don't miss out on all new content published daily, as well as supporting the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.